It's Wellness Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays, and this is a follow-up from last week. The question was, what do you do if you make a really big mistake? And yeah, this is a big one. This is a heavy one, and obviously there's an amount of this that depends entirely on the type of mistake. But this is why I'm working on getting a one-on-one service up and running so things like this can be discussed privately. If you want to help support those efforts, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. I switched into become a backer for the Song of Sparkle Muffin crowdfund. Oh, my stump speeches are getting confused. Okay, that was a little mistake instead of a big mistake. And this is something that sort of the more you rise in your career, in your profile, it becomes more of a risk. If you're like me, you're fortunate enough that your career builds gradually enough that you learn to adjust. You start with the smaller mistakes and then do the bigger ones and the bigger ones and the bigger ones. And by the time you're at the point to massively fuck up, you're kind of good. But not everybody has that luxury. And you see people like YouTubers, like people who hit success very, very early in life, flame out because they're thrust into the public eye, and they fuck up the way late teens and early 20s people are wont to do. And it's out there in public where everyone can see it. And, it's hard. Some people never recover. And that's a great tragedy of this idea that everybody has to be young. The whole brand, the whole influencer brand is all young people because, with age comes wisdom in a lot of these things. I just noticed my volume was low. There's going to be a lot of mistakes in this video because the universe is supporting me on this one. The thing to keep in mind, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, the thing you keep in mind when you make a really big mistake is that whatever consequences there are for the mistake will help you live with it in the long run. It's the anti-WandaVision principle. My big issue with WandaVision is, she mentally enslaved and tortured 3,000 people and their pets and sort of walked away just feeling bad. Now, what happens to somebody like that who gets away with something and there are no consequences, no real consequences for it, is it eats at their soul. And that's why I was so disappointed with that ending, because yikes. People believe that you can get away with doing something really bad and not being punished for it. I don't believe that's possible. I see people who jump from disaster to self-inflicted disaster, and they are shells of humans constantly waiting to get caught. And that's why accountability is so important. The sooner you take accountability for your actions, the less bad the mistake will be. The sooner you own up, the more you contain the blast. That is the core of it. Now, this is where it gets difficult because, especially if it's on the internet, especially if it's being debated in the court of public opinion, even when it's not, even when it just spills off into the internet, it's rough, and it's rough for a while. The thing to keep in mind is don't insist on the situation being salvageable. You may have to cut your losses and move on. That's just the way life works sometimes. We talk a lot about cancel culture, but I'm somebody who actually had a television show be canceled through no fault of my own, though I was the most senior woman on the production, so plenty of people wanted to blame me for things that were not my fault. Um, but when you're down on your luck in entertainment, people cross the street to avoid even saying hello to you. It's a fun time. But you know what? It happens once and it makes you a lot more resilient for what's to come. It's also part of the reason I went fuck you to the television industry, because people who do that, um, that's gross. You find out who people really are. The old cliche of you find out who your friends are is real. It's not a fun lesson, but it's an important lesson to learn going forward. And again, this is all contingent on you being accountable. It's not enough to say you're sorry when you fucked up bad. You have to show that you've learned from the mistake. And you have to be able to elaborate what you're going to do to prevent the mistake from happening again. And you have to give the people you wronged time to process that. All of those things are essential for you to even hope to salvage the situation. There are no guarantees. If you screw up really bad, it could just be that a person is just done with you and you need to accept that. Or, they have to resort you in their life. And you have to be prepared to accept that. That is part of accountability. It doesn't mean it has to be like that forever. But you have to accept it in the short to medium term in order for there to be any hope of any sort of healing and reconciliation. A big part of accepting that you did make a mistake is that if you've wronged a person, and to me the difference between a small mistake and a big mistake is a small mistake, you may feel kind of stupid, but nobody really got hurt. Or it's just, some minor hurt feelings or annoyance. A big mistake is when you've legitimately hurt in a way that was or should have been predictable someone you care about, or even certain relative strangers who didn't deserve the shitty thing you did to them. The whole thing with the dog walker Karen, that was a big mistake. Look at what she did. She initially put out a response that was clearly drafted by some sort of damage control team when it didn't have the result she clearly wanted. She played the victim again. It hurts to be in that accountability process. It is really, really hard. The worst thing you can do is act like you were the wronged party. There's this tension in people. I see this all the time. And people have this compulsion to explain themselves in a way that isn't necessarily tactically wise. Sometimes it will make a person feel better if you explain why you did something. When that happens, if that's the case, they'll usually ask you. Offering an explanation unsolicited risks seeming like an excuse or seeming like you're trying to get out of accountability for your actions. And this is a very, very hard thing about getting good at fucking up. You have to choke back the desire to explain, because trust me from experience, at the time, people don't give a shit. All people care about is that you made a mess for them. They're clearing it up. There may be time later to explain where you were coming from, especially at work. But at the time, if you cannot do things to fix it yourself, get out of the way and let the people who you have dropped a giant mess in their lap fix it. The more you are, if you can fix it, absolutely do it. It shows contrition. But if you can't, get the fuck out of the way. And that's a hard thing to do ego-wise, because it's giving up control. But it's the right thing to do. Giving up control is a big part of the accountability process. And it is the part that a lot of people struggle with more than anything. It is, however, essential to learning from your mistakes. Now, a lot of the time, people are terrified of getting fired. People are terrified of the work stuff, right? It will happen sometimes. I worked in extremely abusive workplaces where I got blamed for a lot of stuff that wasn't on me. They were workplaces where the more competent you were, the more people were looking to take you out, and every perceived error is just amplified because they're trying to bust you down a peg. And there was this one instance where there was this set designer who was profoundly emotionally unstable, burst into tears, whenever, on the slightest thing. And one time I quote unquote made her cry. And a lighting guy was like, "You need to apologize to her." And I'm like, "What? What do you mean I need to apologize to her? She does this all the time." "Yes, but consequences, 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 And those are the moments where you have to decide, am I just going to eat crow and take one for the team, so to speak? Or am I going to stick to my guns and basically go, no, I didn't make her cry. This is sexist bullshit. Guys tell her to do things all the time and they don't have to apologize to her. Now that's the route I took. That was a mistake. And I got blackballed and I ate it for months. And that was all I could do. Just eat it. Because I didn't play the politics properly, she was able to do anything she fucking wanted to me for months and months and months. And sometimes that's the mistake, right? It was an abusive workplace. Yes, it was a tactical error, not a moral error. And it's really important to know the difference between the two. If I were to do that again, I would have just apologized to her because it was really no skin off my nose, and it would have been better for me in the long run. But I was about 23 at the time. I didn't know as well back then. You may be listening to this and going, that wasn't that big a mistake, because again, it wasn't a moral error, right? But the fallout with my job, it was a big tactical error. And that's the thing. Thinking about things as tactical errors versus moral errors are one way having to eat crow in the short term to preserve your position long term. Now, it could be that no matter what I did, it would have been misery because there was a lot of sexism at that workplace. But like I said, had I had the chance to do that over again with the benefit of wisdom, I would have done things differently. Now, there were a lot of other scraps with people at that same workplace that didn't end well for me, but I stand by because it was just straight up bullying, not somebody who was just unstable. And those I stand by, even though there were negative consequences. And sometimes for your own peace of mind, you have to just sort of take your lumps. And this is not when you make a mistake. This is a little off topic. I'm giving gradations so that people can sort it out in their head, because let's face it, this is a question of negative consequences and how do I move on when a bridge is burned. That's the root of what do you do when you've massively fucked up, right? Again, relinquishing control, recognizing that this happens to a lot of very successful people, and recognizing that life does go on despite this are big, big things. Sometimes you actually didn't do anything wrong. It was just a shitty deal. Sometimes you made a tactical error, not a moral one. Sometimes you did make a moral error. And it really pays to know the difference between these three things. Either way, if you are so at odds with your environment that you are looking at a clean break, that is often the best thing for it. And this was something that was really, really difficult for me to learn. I had that nerd fallacy where walking away from people is rejection, and you don't reject people because you want to give people the chances you weren't given because you're a weirdo, and well, I'm a weirdo. And you want to give people all the opportunities and grace that you want. Do unto others. Golden rule. Very, very noble. However, often a massive, massive tactical error. It's better to do the Seneca route where, when you've decided someone is your friend, yeah, you give them everything. You be a really great friend and you give them that acceptance. But before, and I'm paraphrasing here, but before you decide that, someone is actually a friend, not just an acquaintance, but a friend, show some judgment. You have the absolute right, and it is healthy for you to see warning signs in other people, and you go, you know what? This person isn't good for me. Just because you've been rejected yourself in the past does not mean you're not allowed to listen to the warning signs in your own head. And a lot of the time, really big screw-ups that good people make are because you either got run down, you got overextended, or you got, turned around emotionally or in terms of your understanding. And these are all things that you can learn from and do better going forward. But you can only do that if you're not horribly traumatized by the mistake, right? And that's the goal. The goal is to not salvage status quo. The goal is to move on with your life in the new normal, taking responsibility for the things that you should take responsibility for, and relinquishing control of the stuff that you can't. And again, that is the only way there is even remotely hope of salvaging the situation. It seems really counterintuitive that you have to give up control over salvaging the situation to have any hope to salvage it. But what it comes down to is that making things right is about taking the emotional burden off the person you've wronged and taking it onto yourself and not fucking complaining about it. And it's the not fucking complaining about it part that's hard. You know, that's where the accountability comes in. And it takes some wisdom to know the difference between I deserve this and this is an appropriate and understandable proportionate human response, and okay, I made a mistake, but you know, the punishment doesn't fit the crime here. And that can be a good learning experience of a relationship too. Sometimes mistakes make you realize that that person is not the right person to be in your life, in that role at that time. And that's okay. Again, mistakes are how we learn. And a lot of the times when you make a giant mistake like this, it's because you didn't learn from the little mistakes going forward. Now, sometimes that's not true. There's a caveat to that. When you hit a position, and I've been a senior producer on television shows, I've made my share of bad calls. When you are powerful enough, you are in a position where the decisions you make impact other people. And if you're wrong, being wrong impacts other people. And there was a great line on Blue Bloods the other night. Yes, I watched Blue Bloods. I love Blue Bloods. It's one of my guilty pleasure TV shows. But Tom Selleck's character, Frank Reagan, says, one decision involving personnel, there is no right or wrong here. There's just what we can live with. And that's the reality of leadership. There are things where people are going to think you're not just wrong, but evil, right? I mean, anybody who saw my Twitter feed yesterday, me just going to the mat, going, fuck you, J.K. Rowling, would find it strange that I would ever be accused of being a virulent transphobe. But there were 2 cancellation attempts against me on that point. It happens when you've got a profile, you know. This is a part of life. This is a part of actually living a life instead of just surviving. Mistakes are going to happen. Sometimes they're big. And one of the things you learn from the mistakes that really stay with you and linger and continue to hurt years after the fact is, you know, that's where wisdom comes from. And that's how you figure out who you are. And the goal is to not become bitter. And bitterness comes from hanging on to unsalvageable situations far too long. And, you know, it seems so quaint back in the day when Hugh Grant got caught with a prostitute when he was dating Elizabeth Hurley, who was like this top supermodel at the time. And he did this apology tour on the talk shows. I mean, this was considered just such a big mistake back then, you know. And he did this apology tour and he let people make fun of him. And all he just did, apologize, lather, rinse, repeat. I'm sorry. Did I not say I'm sorry enough? I'm sorry. That's the only way through. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. fucked up about as much as someone could fuck up without accidentally killing a person. His career was in shambles, and, you know, he took it. He did a bunch of small films. And then he got the chance with Iron Man, and you know, he went with it. And I mean, dude was in prison, and yeah, you can say, okay, he's a white dude. It's not the same. Fair point. But the basic mechanics of it are the same. You didn't see him doing a poor me thing in public all the time. He went back to work, took the work that he could get. Johnny Depp's a pro at this too. People don't remember this is not the first time Johnny Depp has been canceled. He knows this. You know, Michael Keaton got canceled just for walking away from the Batman franchise because there was so much money in it. So he got his, you know, career blackballed for, 10 years. It happens in life. It happens in life. And, you know, if you can find the story of somebody who fucked up in a similar way and sort of made it work, moved on, you know, learned from it, got better, got stronger from it. That may help, though keep in mind that every situation is different. Individual mileage may vary, and you can't do it the same way somebody else did because you're not them. But I do really think the core is you gotta know when to let go. And you have to recognize when being accountable means just taking your lumps, recognizing somebody and not want to see you, at least for a while, accepting that and moving on. And if I'm making this sound easy to your ears, that is not my intention. It is hard. As somebody who has had to do it, it is hard. As somebody who has had to, you know, deal with that reality when it wasn't fair, when I didn't actually do anything wrong, it's hard. But that's the way I see it is when I get ostracized from something and it isn't fair, that's good training for when I do screw up and have to eat it, you know? But it really is super, super important just in life in general. The minute you realize you're not able to come through or you're not, you know, something has gone wrong, tell people immediately, like as soon as possible, because it minimizes the damage. The worst thing you can do is to try to hide something like that, because the longer you hide it, the more it compounds the mistake, the more it seems like a deliberate mistake, the more you look guilty, the bigger the disaster is going to be when it finally comes out. And I know some people are afraid of stuff they did years in the past that they're afraid of someone finding. I don't consider it depends on what someone did. I've seen a bunch of angles on that. And let me tell you, there's a big difference between someone admitting something because they want to set a good example of somebody living better than they did 10 years ago, and somebody who is confessing something for sympathy, and then it turns out they hadn't learned anything. Everything's everybody else's fault. If you set an example in advance of not passing the buck, of not making everything somebody else's fault, people are more forgiving of you when you do make a mistake. It's about cultivating environments. It's about and keeping, you know, a measure of the temperature of an environment. Sometimes horribly screwing up at a job you are miserable in is for the best. Sometimes, you know, a relationship blowing up that you couldn't admit you weren't really happy in is for the best. It's hard in the short term. It's really hard. But long term, you know, every door that closes is a chance to try a new door because you're not constantly trying to keep that door held open, right? Hopefully that helps. Let me know. This is probably just the beginning of a discussion, but I'm really interested in your thoughts in this video. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching and be well.